All right, they're back at it again with the college football playoff changes. I'm going to do my best to try to explain it here, but I'm going to be honest. This is one of those things that it's like you can understand it, but that isn't. But it's still hard to explain. I just this is the second time I'm recording this video. Like, it's not easy to explain the college football playoff in terms of ranking versus seeding, conference champions, and all that. Anyway. A lot of problems with college football, a lot of problems with the college football playoff, and right now they're addressing one of those issues or concerns that a lot of people had, which was the way seeding in the playoffs worked versus the actual rankings, right? So you remember last year. So if you look on the bottom of the screen, this is the new way they would seed the playoffs. The top of the screen is how the playoffs were seeded last year. So the easiest way is just to look at it and see the differences, right? So we're still not going to do the straight seeding. You're still guaranteed a playoff spot if you're one of the 5 highest ranked conference champions. The difference is last year, if you were one of the 4 highest ranked conference champions, you automatically got seeded 1 through 4. Remember? So by looking on here, if you remember, Boise State ended up with a 3 seed, even though they were ranked 9th in the final college football playoff ranking. They got bumped all the way up to 3 because they were the 3rd highest ranked team that won their conference. So when the seeds came out, they got bumped from 9 to 3. Arizona State was actually ranked like 12th in the final playoff ranking, but since they were the 4th highest ranked conference champion, they actually got seeded 4th. You see that on the top of the screen there. That was last year's college football seeding model. Oregon was the 1 seed. Georgia was the 2 seed. Boise State was the 3 seed. Arizona State was the 4 seed. Okay? And it's got the rankings next to it. So you look at a team, Notre Dame obviously, got bumped down. Some of these teams got bumped down. You had teams that were ranked 1 through 4, but didn't get seeded 1 through 4 because they didn't win their conference championship. And people just, oh my God, this is terrible. It was confusing. Like I said, I find myself getting confused just trying to talk about it in a video. You had Clemson, who finished ranked, 16th in the final playoff ranking. They had 3 losses, Clemson did. They did win the ACC, but their final playoff ranking, they were 16th. But they got moved all the way up to 12th because they were the 5th highest ranked conference champion, and the 5 highest ranked conference champions were guaranteed a spot in the playoffs. And it was all confusing because they're like, why is, Boise State and Arizona State getting moved up ahead of all these other teams? Well, because they won their conference. They have to get 1 through 4. Well, Clemson won their conference. Why aren't they 1 through 4? Well, Clemson was the 5th. It became, trying to explain it to somebody who wasn't already an expert on it or someone who already didn't understand it became impossible. So they've changed it, kinda. That's the good news. The bad news is it's only for 1 year. And this is the problem. There are people that still don't understand how the playoffs were seeded last year, right? Now they're going to change it for this year, which means those people aren't going to understand it again. It's going to be hard to understand again. And this is the only year of this playoff system. In 2026, the playoffs are totally changing. The number of teams, how you get in, automatic qualifiers, all of that's totally changing in 2026. So let's just stick to 2025 for this video. So on the bottom of the screen is what the playoff bracket would have looked like last year. I feel like this is the easiest way to sort of see the difference between how they're going to seed teams in 2025 versus how they seeded the teams last year, okay? So you see what the seeding would have looked like last year had they used this new seeding model. Basically, the new seeding model still guarantees that the top 5 conference winners will get a spot in the 12-team playoff. It just does not guarantee them a spot 1 through 4. In other words, Clemson, who finished ranked 16th last year, but won the ACC, would have received an automatic bump to number 12. And you see that here in the updated graphic that shows you what the playoffs would have looked like last year. You see that Clemson is seeded 12th, even though, like it says on there, they were ranked 16th. So the differences apply to Boise State and Arizona State, which we talked about already. Boise State and Arizona State were ranked 9th and 12th, but they were seeded 3rd and 4th because they were guaranteed a 3 and a 4 seed because they were 2 of the 4 highest ranked conference champions. That no longer exists. If Arizona State wins the Big 12 and they're ranked ninth in the final playoff ranking, they're going to be seeded ninth. They're not going to receive a bump. The 1 through 4 spots are no longer saved or guaranteed for the 4 highest conference champions. So you see the 4 seeds last year, had we gone with this new model, instead of being Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, and Arizona State, your top 4 seeds would have been Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State. And if you follow the bracket along from there, you can see that we get drastically different matchups with that seeding versus the seeding we actually have. Georgia, who lost to Notre Dame in the second round of the playoffs, wouldn't even have played Notre Dame in the second round of the playoffs. They would have played the winner of SMU, Tennessee. Tennessee, who got blown out by Ohio State in the first round of the playoffs, instead of having to travel to Columbus to play Ohio State, would have hosted in Knoxville SMU. Arizona State would have had to travel and play at Ohio State. Boise State would have had to travel and play at Indiana. If you remember, Indiana had to travel and play at Notre Dame in the first round. Instead, Indiana would have actually hosted Boise State. It had a home playoff game. And Clemson would have been the team that had to travel to Notre Dame in round 1, as opposed to last year where they did travel in round 1, but they traveled to Texas. So you end up with totally different first-round matchups, which then affect the matchups from there based on the seeding, right? So looking at this, what do you think? Remember all the complaints last year about the first-round blowouts and, oh, my God, this is unwatchable, everybody's getting beat like a drum, whatever. Do you think this would have been better matchups based on last year's teams? Do you think Clemson Notre Dame would have been closer than Clemson Texas or closer than Indiana Notre Dame? You have Boise State and Indiana there. Personally, I would have loved to have seen that game. I think that would have been a great game, Boise State and Indiana. Clemson Notre Dame probably would have been a good game. The Clemson-Texas game was a pretty good game. I mean, Texas ended up winning by 14, but Clemson had their chances in the fourth quarter and kind of blew it. I think SMU at Tennessee would have been a way better game than SMU at Penn State, which was a blowout, or Tennessee at Ohio State, which was a blowout. SMU at Tennessee would have been great. Would have been a great game. You move into some of the second-round games, it's pointless to really talk about those because you don't even know which team would have won the first round game. But I think we would have gotten better first round games last year had they gone with that seeding. Now, is that guaranteed to be the case every year? No, you have the hindsight or you have the benefit of hindsight now, to look back and know which games were the blowout. So you say, oh, I think SMU Tennessee would be better than Ohio State Tennessee. I don't know. Maybe Tennessee would have beat SMU by 40. I mean, who knows? Maybe SMU beats Tennessee by 40. I mean, we don't know. Anyway, I do think it makes more sense to seed it this way. I thought it was completely ridiculous that Boise State and Arizona State got bumped up into the top 4. No disrespect to them. I do think that conference winners should be guaranteed a playoff spot now, and I'm on record with that. Because of the big mess with Florida State a couple of years ago, I just feel like you have to have something in place that guarantees you a playoff spot if you do something. Whatever that something is. And the something that makes the most sense is if you win your conference, you get in the playoffs. We'll put you somewhere. Maybe you don't get seated where you think you should be seated, but you get in, right? That makes sense to me. Every other sports league kind of works that way. If you win your conference or your division or your league or whatever it is during the regular season, you get into the postseason somewhere, right? So I don't mind having automatic bids, but it did seem a little ridiculous that, a team like Boise State, or honestly, even Arizona State, who I thought was good. I liked Arizona State. They were fun to watch. I loved Scattaboo. Levitt, their quarterback, was really good, and he's back this year. But the idea that Arizona State would receive a bump all the way up to number 4, remember, they were ranked 12th. 12th, the final playoff ranking. They were ranked 12th after winning the Big 12. They were ranked 12th. The fact that they would receive a bump all the way up to number 4, pushing back teams like Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oregon, Texas, whoever else that you might would have had ahead of them, it was a little weird. It was a little weird. So I think this is okay. It's still really confusing, but what makes it confusing is that, we're so used to looking at playoff rankings starting in the end of October. They start putting out playoff rankings every week. So in your mind, you sort of get an idea, okay, this is like a 10 to 12 type team, or this is like a 5 to 8 type team. And you follow those rankings along for 5 to 6 weeks, and then the playoffs get seeded, and the seeds don't match up at all with the rankings that we've been watching for 5 weeks, because you had teams like Boise State and Arizona State that were getting, 5, 6, 7 spot jumps because they were guaranteed the bye week. That's gone now. I think that will make it a little bit easier to understand. Again, it's all changing again next year. And it feels like this is a problem that college football is making worse by the minute. One of the biggest problems that people have with the changes in college football is that there are so many of them. To some people, NIL is the biggest issue, maybe. Or to some people, the transfer portal might be the biggest issue. To some people, the mess of the playoffs last year might be the biggest issue. Expanding the playoffs might be the biggest issue to other people. Whatever the issue is, they're all issues having to do with something that has recently changed in college football. And now you've got a playoff structure, which wasn't very popular to begin with. There was not, during the 4-team playoff, there was not a large section of the college football public demanding an expanded playoff. Now, you did have the situation at the end of every season where whoever ended 5th or 6th, like those fans would try to argue that they should have been a top 4 team. But that's not the same as arguing for an expanded playoff. So we weren't really asking for an expanded playoff. Now, when you force-fed it to us, we kind of said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And then we have 1 year of it last year. It was impossible to understand the seeding versus the ranking. It created mismatches. It gave certain teams perceived unfair advantages over others. Oregon being the prime example. They were the best team in the country all year long, yet somehow they had to play Ohio State in their first playoff game instead of, whoever else or whatever. But so it was just a mess in the first year. And now here we are a year later and you're changing it again. And to be fair, it needed to be changed because you screwed it up so bad in year 1. So, you had all kind of changes heading into last year with a new playoff going to 12 teams. We never had it before. Now you've got all kinds of questions going into this year because you're completely changing the seeding around. And, what's going to happen is that not everybody is paying attention to college football this time of year. They're not. So, yeah, the articles are out now. Idiots like me are making videos about it now. But the majority of college football fans aren't even paying attention to college football right now. They'll tune back in middle of July, beginning of August, leading up to the start of the season. They're going to watch the whole season. They're going to think they have it figured out based on last year. Then the whole seeding thing is going to happen, and they're going to go, wait a minute. How come the top 4 isn't conference champions like it was last year? And then we're going to have to make a whole nother set of articles and a whole nother set of videos in December explaining all of this over again. It's a mess that college football is creating on its own. If you didn't change everything constantly over the last 10 years, you wouldn't have to spend so much time explaining the changes to people, would you? Maybe slow down on some of these changes. And again, I've been in favor of a lot of them. But it's a lot in a short period of time. And it is running some people off. It is running, especially some of the more casual type fans. They're just like, I'm not. What am I? I'm not. Why would I? Oh, I'm not watching this anymore. It's different every single year. The player I like this year is not on the team because he transfers somewhere else. Every time I turn around, somebody's suing the NCAA for something. NIL is ruining it, whatever it is. And they just throw their hands up and they're just like, wake me up in 10 years when they get all this settled. And to be honest, I understand that feeling, I can't afford to do that. I do this for a living. I'm going to be talking about college football every single day, no matter what. But it does feel like hibernate for 5 years and then check back in on college football. Like, we need to fast forward to the end, whatever the end is. And, there's going to be things at the end that we like. There's going to be things at the end we don't like, but we will all like that we will be at the end, whatever that end is. If it's players becoming employees, if it's the football teams breaking away from the universities, if it's going to 2 conferences, and I'm not in favor of any of that. But if that's where we're going, just get us there so we can stop with the constant changes. I'll tell you one issue I have with the new seating format, and it probably won't surprise you. I don't think Notre Dame should be rewarded for not playing a conference championship game. I think it's insane. And if you're not sure exactly what I mean, in the previous model last year, in order to get a 1-4 seed, which gives you a bye week, by the way, you had to win your conference championship. So Notre Dame had no way of getting a 1-4 seed because they refused to join a conference. Therefore, they can't win a conference championship. So they were never going to get a bye week. And as much as I didn't like how confusing the idea of that was, with the conference champions being guaranteed a 1-4 spot, it made sense that if you were going to do that, to exclude Notre Dame, since they don't play in a conference championship game. Well, now that caveat is gone. You don't have to be a conference winner to get a 1-4 spot. So you're going to have a lot of teams now who play a football game on conference championship weekend and lose it, while Notre Dame is sitting at home. So they're getting a bye week already. Notre Dame gets a bye week every year during conference championship week. So let's say Notre Dame is sitting at number 5 at the end of the year, 11-1, 10-2, whatever. They're ranked 5, and the 4th and the 3rd ranked team lose in their conference championship games. Well, what do you think is going to happen? While Notre Dame is sitting at home not doing anything, that 3rd or 4th ranked team is going to take a loss on conference championship weekend, and Notre Dame is going to move into the top 4 for the playoffs, and those teams that lost are going to move out of the top 4. What does that mean? The team that lost in the conference championship game is going to have to turn around and play the following week in week 1 of the playoffs. Meanwhile, Notre Dame, who didn't play during conference championship weekend because they're not in one, had a bye during conference championship weekend, and in this scenario would then get another bye the following week. It's a reward for not risking a loss instead of a reward for winning your conference. It's a reward to Notre Dame for avoiding a possible loss, as opposed to making it an incentive to win your conference. And that's the issue. So I would add another rule to this that says Notre Dame still can't get a top 4 seed. I think that should be built in. I don't know if fair is the right word or what, but you've got, how many Power 4 teams do you have now? 67 or 68, something like that. All but one of those teams are operating under a certain set of guidelines, and then Notre Dame has its own carve-outs. And, I just think it's ridiculous. So I don't think Notre Dame should be given a 1-4 seed. I don't care if they're 12-0. I don't care if they're 12-0. Because any other team that's 12-0 is going to be playing a 13th game as a conference championship this year. Notre Dame won't be, no matter what. Notre Dame is going to have a bye week the first Saturday in December, no matter what. Any other team in the country that goes 12-0 will be playing on that first Saturday. A game they could lose, because guess what? They're going to be playing a good team. They're going to be playing the first or second best team in their league, in their conference. So it's going to be a tough game, a game they could lose while Notre Dame sits at home. And if enough teams ranked 1-4 lose on conference championship Saturday, then, Notre Dame could get one of those spots, which would then give them 2 bye weeks in a row. Whereas the team that lost the conference championship has to play 2 playoff games in a row, basically the conference championship game and then the first round of the playoffs. But they don't listen to Uncle Lou, and the Notre Dame fans are going to cry in the comments section or whatever else like they normally do. But that's just my opinion. It's just my opinion. It should be the same set of rules for everybody. Notre Dame should not have their own carve out. You know who makes up the College Football Playoff Commission that meets and decides and makes all these rules and changes? The conference commissioner of all 9 conferences. That's Power 4 and Group of 5. And the athletic director of Notre Dame. So your school has a conference commissioner in the room arguing for you and 15, 16, 17 other teams. In other words, they're not in that college football playoff commission to argue for you specifically as a team. They're in there to argue for whatever conference you're in. So you're getting like 1/18th representation, 1/16th, 1/17th representation, however many teams are in your conference, right? Notre Dame, on the other hand, their athletic director has a seat at that same table. Who do you think he's in there arguing for? He's in there arguing specifically for Notre Dame. So it's too many unfair advantages that basically Notre Dame is handed for no real reason at all. They've got one national title in the last 50 years. They're not some type of national treasure that we can't do without. Anyway, Rudy, y'all gonna be mad if you, the Notre Dame fans are gonna be mad if they watch this. Anyway, have a good one.